Welcome to Midnight Delight, where nightmares come to play. Tonight we're venturing deep into the heart of darkness with chilling tales of Bigfoot encounters that defy explanation. Are you ready to uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows? Then sit back, relax, and prepare to be terrified by these true stories that will make you question what truly lurks in the woods at night. They say the mountains have their secrets, and I've lived long enough to know that some secrets are better left undisturbed. My name is Ethel Hawkins, and I've called this mountain town home for nearly 70 years. A quiet place tucked away in the forest, where life moves slow and the world outside seems far, far away. But things started to change one cold winter, about 10 years ago. It was a harsh season, colder than any I'd seen in decades. The snow piled high, the wind howled through the trees, and the nights seemed to stretch on forever. But it wasn't just the weather that made the winter different. It was the feeling in the air, an unease that settled over the town like a heavy blanket, something you couldn't quite put your finger on but knew was there all the same. The first sign that something was wrong came when Old Man Jenkins' dog went missing. Folks said the dog had run off, maybe chased a deer into the woods, but Jenkins swore up and down that he'd heard something outside that night. Something big. I remember him telling me, his voice shaking, how he'd gone out with a flashlight calling for his dog, but all he found were strange, oversized tracks in the snow. He said they weren't like anything he'd ever seen, too large to be a bear, too human-like to be anything natural. Of course, most people didn't pay him any mind. Jenkins was known for his tall tales, always going on about the strange things he'd seen in the woods. But I could see it in his eyes this time. He wasn't spinning yarns. He was scared. Genuinely scared. Then, more animals started disappearing. Livestock mostly. Sheep, goats, even a few cattle. Farmers would find their pens empty in the morning, the gates broken, and the snow outside trampled with those same large tracks. Some of the animals were found later, torn apart and half-eaten, their remains scattered deep in the woods. The talk around town grew more serious then. People started to wonder if maybe there was something out there, something more than just a hungry bear. But no one wanted to believe it. Pine Hollow had always been a safe place, a peaceful place. The idea that something dangerous could be lurking in our own backyard was too much to bear. But it wasn't just the animals. People started seeing things, shadows moving between the trees, strange figures standing at the edge of the forest, watching, waiting. Miss Thompson swore she saw something peering into her kitchen window one night. Something tall with glowing eyes. Her husband dismissed it as a trick of the light, but she wouldn't hear of it. She packed up and went to stay with her sister in the city, refusing to come back until the snow melted and the days grew longer. Then, one night, it happened. The first attack. It was old Tom Brady who was the first to go. He lived alone in a cabin on the outskirts of town, right at the edge of the forest. He'd been a logger all his life, a man who knew the woods better than anyone. If there was one person who wasn't afraid of the stories, it was Tom. I remember the night he was taken like it was yesterday. The wind was howling something fierce, and the snow was coming down in thick, heavy flakes. I was sitting by the fire, knitting a blanket for my granddaughter when I heard it, the scream. It cut through the night, loud and piercing, a sound that sent chills down my spine. I knew right away it was Tom. No one else lived out that way. The whole town heard it, and soon the menfolk were gathering up their guns and flashlights, setting out into the storm to find him. I wanted to go too, but my old bones weren't what they used to be, so I stayed behind, praying they'd find him safe. But when they came back, they were pale as ghosts. Tom's cabin had been torn apart, windows shattered, the door ripped clean off its hinges. There were deep gouges in the wood like something had clawed its way inside. And there was blood, too much blood, staining the snow outside. But no sign of Tom, just those oversized tracks leading off into the trees. After that, the fear took hold of Pine Hollow. The attacks didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. People started locking their doors and windows at night, something we'd never had to do before. The kids were kept inside and no one went out after dark. But it didn't matter. Whatever was out there, it wasn't afraid of locks or lights. It was a few nights later when the creature came back. This time, it went after the Brown family. They lived in a small house on the other side of town, not far from where Tom's cabin had been. They were good people, quiet folks who kept to themselves. When we didn't see them for a few days, folks started to worry. A few of the men went out to check on them, but what they found, well, it's something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The house was in ruins, much like Tom's cabin had been. The front door was splintered, the walls inside smeared with blood. They found Mr. and Mrs. Brown in what was left of their living room, their bodies torn apart in a way that didn't seem possible for any creature of this earth. But their little girl, Mary, was missing. The only trace of her was a single small shoe laying on the snow outside, next to those same oversized tracks. That was the final straw. The town was in a state of panic, everyone too afraid to stay but too scared to leave. We were trapped, surrounded by those cursed woods, knowing that whatever was out there was watching us, waiting for its next chance to strike. The sheriff tried to organize a hunt, bringing in men from the surrounding towns, but it was no use. They went out into the forest, guns in hand, but they didn't find anything. No sign of the creature, no sign of Mary. Just those tracks leading deeper and deeper into the woods where no one dared to follow. In the end, a decision was made to abandon Pine Hollow. We couldn't stay, not with that thing out there. Families packed up what they could carry and left. Some in the dead of night, others in broad daylight, too terrified to look back. I was one of the last to leave. I'd lived in Pine Hollow all my life, and it broke my heart to go, but I knew there was no other choice. As I drove away, I looked back at the mountains one last time, and I swear I saw it. A tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching us leave. They never caught the creature, whatever it was. Some say it's still out there, roaming the woods, waiting for the next poor soul to cross its path. The town of Pine Hollow is nothing but a ghost town now, empty and forgotten. But those of us who were there, who lived through the terror, will never forget. We left Pine Hollow to the shadows, and to the thing that lurks within them. But sometimes late at night, I still hear the wind howling through the trees, and I wonder if it's the wind at all. They say the woods have a life of their own, that they watch you, listen to you. I never put much stock in those kinds of stories. After all, I'd been hunting these forests for years without so much as a scratch. But all that changed on our last trip, the one where we went deep into the northern ridge, far beyond the places we usually hunted. That's where we made our mistake. That's where we crossed a line we didn't even know existed. It was a crisp autumn morning when we set out, me, Jake, Travis, and old Bill. We'd been hunting buddies for years, and this trip was supposed to be just like the others. Head out early, track some game, and be back in time to tell tall tales over a fire. But the northern ridge was different. It was wild, untouched, a place where even the locals warned us not to go. But Jake, always the eager one, convinced us it was worth the risk. Bigger game out there, he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. More isolated. We'll bag something no one else has. We should have listened to the warnings. The first day was uneventful, just us in the quiet of the woods. We set up a camp by a small stream, the trees towering above us. There was something about that place, though, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The forest felt different, felt like it was watching us, judging us. That night, as we sat around the fire, I thought I heard something out in the darkness. A low guttural sound, almost like a growl, but too deep to be a bear or a wolf. I mentioned it to the others, but they laughed it off. Just your imagination, Bill said, though even he couldn't hide the unease in his eyes. The next day we set out early, rifles in hand, ready to track whatever was out there. But the deeper we went, the more I felt like we were being followed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, catching glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. By midday we found tracks, huge ones, like nothing I'd ever seen before. They were too big to be a bear, too wide to be a man. Jake was thrilled, convinced we were on the trail of the biggest game of our lives. But something about those tracks made my stomach turn. They felt wrong, like we were trespassing in a place we didn't belong. We followed the tracks for hours, deeper and deeper into the forest. The woods grew darker, the trees closer together, and the silence more oppressive. I could tell the others were starting to feel it too. Travis kept looking around, his grip on his rifle tightening, and Bill was unusually quiet. That's when it happened. We were crossing a rocky ravine, the tracks leading up the other side, when the first rock came out of nowhere. It smashed into the ground a few feet from us, sending up a spray of dirt and gravel. We all jumped, spinning around, rifles raised, but there was nothing. Just the trees and the silence. "What the hell was that?" Travis muttered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, another rock came flying, this one hitting Jake in the shoulder, knocking him to the ground. He let out a yelp of pain, clutching his arm as we rushed to grab him. But the rocks kept coming, one after another, each one bigger than the last. It was like the forest itself had come alive, angry and vengeful. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran scrambling over rocks, dodging trees, the rocks crashing down around us like thunder. I could hear Bill shouting, telling us to keep moving, but it was hard to think, hard to do anything but run. Another rock hit Travis in the leg, and he went down hard, cursing in pain. Bill and I grabbed him, practically dragging him as we stumbled through the trees. The rocks kept coming, but there was no sign of where they were coming from. It was like they were being hurled by some invisible force, something massive and terrifying. We finally reached a clearing, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. The rocks had stopped, but the forest was still, too still. I could feel it watching us, whatever it was, waiting for us to make a move. Jake was pale, his shoulder bleeding where the rock had hit him, and Travis could barely stand, his legs swollen and bruised. Bill was panting, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is out there?" he whispered, but none of us had an answer. We stayed in that clearing for what felt like hours, too scared to move, too scared to even speak. I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see something emerge from the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the weight of whatever had attacked us. Eventually, we knew we couldn't stay there. We had to get back to camp. We had to get out of those cursed woods. We moved slowly, cautiously, every snap of a twig making us jump. The forest felt like a living thing, angry and vengeful, and we were trespassers in its domain. When we finally reached the camp, it was nearly dark. We grabbed what we could, not even bothering to pack up properly, and got the hell out of there. The whole way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that that thing in the woods was watching us, waiting for us to slip up. We made it back to town in one piece, but we were different men than the ones who had set out. We didn't talk about what had happened, not to each other, not to anyone. There was no need. We all knew the truth. Something out there had attacked us, something that wasn't just an animal, something that was more than human. They say the woods have a life of their own, and now I see that that's true. We crossed a line that day, trespassed in a place we didn't belong, and we paid the price. I don't go up to the Northern Ridge anymore, and I sure as hell don't go hunting in those woods, because whatever's out there, it's still waiting, it's still angry, and next time, we might not be so lucky. We were all excited for the weekend. The kids had been counting down the days, and I have to admit, the idea of getting away from the hustle of everyday life was appealing. Two families, ours and the Millers, had decided to go camping together in Black Pine Forest, a remote area known for its tall, dense trees and serene, untouched beauty. We'd camped there before, and it was always peaceful, a place where you could hear the wind rustle through the leaves and the distant call of birds, far from the noise of the city. This time, though, it felt different. We didn't know it then, but we were about to face something far more terrifying than we could even imagine. We set up camp in a small clearing near the edge of the forest, close to a gently flowing stream. The kids, our two and the Millers' three, were thrilled, running around, playing tag and gathering sticks for the fire. The sky was a brilliant blue, the air crisp with the scent of pine, and everything seemed perfect. The dads, Tom and I, set up the tents while our wives, Sarah and Julie, unpacked the food. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. The kids huddled close, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. The forest around us was pitch black. The only light came from our fire, casting flickering shadows that danced on the surrounding trees. But as the night wore on, something changed. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, seemed to fade away, leaving an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The kids noticed it too, their laughter dying down as they glanced nervously into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Tom asked suddenly, his voice low. We all froze, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the crackling of the fire. Then, faintly, we heard it. A distant, deep growl, so low it was almost a vibration in the air. It was followed by a rustling in the trees, far off but getting closer. "What the hell was that?" Julie whispered, clutching her jacket tightly around her. "Probably just an animal," I said, trying to sound reassuring, though my heart was pounding. "Maybe a bear?" But even as I said it, I knew it didn't sound right. The growl didn't belong to any animal I'd heard in these woods. It was too deep, too unnatural. The kids were starting to get scared, their eyes wide as they looked to us for reassurance. We decided to call it a night, ushering everyone into the tents. Tom and I stayed up a little longer, sitting by the dying fire, listening to the night. The growl came again, closer this time. My stomach churned with unease. Whatever was out there, it was big, and it was getting closer. "We should keep watch," Tom said quietly, his eyes scanning the darkness, "just in case." I nodded, agreeing without hesitation. We took turns, one of us keeping an eye on the camp while the other tried to get some rest. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it out there, moving through the trees, watching us. It was sometime after midnight when the first scream shattered the silence. It was high-pitched, filled with terror, and it came from Julie's tent. Tom and I bolted to our feet, grabbing the flashlights, and rushed over. Julie was outside the tent, her face pale, pointing toward the trees. "It was there," she stammered. "Something was out there, watching us." We shone our flashlights into the woods, the beams cutting through the darkness, but all we saw were trees and shadows. The kids were crying now, huddled together in fear. Sarah tried to comfort them, but she was shaking just as badly. And then we saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a massive figure moving between the trees, too large to be any animal we knew. Then the flashlight caught its eyes glowing red, staring right at us. The creature stepped into the light, and we saw it clearly for the first time. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur. Its face was twisted, somewhere between man and beast, with a wide, snarling mouth and teeth that glistened in the night. Its eyes were filled with rage, and it let out a roar that shook the ground beneath our feet. "Get back," Tom shouted, raising his flashlight like a weapon, though we both knew it was useless. The creature charged, moving with a speed that belied its size. We scrambled to get the kids back into the tents, but the thing was on us in seconds. It grabbed one of the coolers, hurling it through the air like it weighed nothing. It smashed against a tree, sending food and supplies flying everywhere. We huddled together, trying to protect the kids, but the creature didn't attack us directly. Instead, it seemed to be toying with us, throwing rocks and debris, smashing everything in its path. It was like it was trying to scare us, to drive us out of its territory. And it was working. "Get to the cars," I shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the vehicles parked at the edge of the clearing. Tom and Julie did the same, each of us carrying a child in our arms, the others running as fast as they could. The creature followed us, its footsteps thunderous behind us, its roars filling the night. We reached the cars, fumbling with the keys in our panic. The creature was right behind us, so close I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. I shoved the kids into the back seat, not even bothering to strap them in, and jumped into the driver's seat. I turned the engine on and slammed the car into gear, peeling out of there as fast as I could. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us go. It let out one last roar, a sound that I knew would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. We drove through the night, not stopping until we were miles away from that cursed place. No one spoke, silence in the car heavy with fear and disbelief. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, where we collapsed into a cheap motel, too shaken to even think about going home. None of us talked about what we saw that night. We tried to forget, to move on, but the memory stayed with us, a dark shadow that we could never escape. The forest took on a new meaning after that. It wasn't just a place of peace and beauty anymore. It was a place of terror, a place where something ancient and angry still roamed, protecting its territory from intruders like us. We never went back to Black Pine Forest, and I know we never will, because whatever that thing was, it's still out there, waiting for the next foolish group of campers to wander into its domain. And I pray they'll have the sense to run before it's too late. Thank you for joining us on this terrifying journey through the unknown. If these stories sent chills down your spine, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Midnight Delight for more bone-chilling tales. Have your own encounter or story to share? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Until next time, stay safe, stay cautious, and remember, some things are better left in the dark.